welcome and thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
What is your earliest memory of the concept or the ideal or the experience of Ahimsa?
So I have two actually that I would like to share, short ones. So I was born into a Jain family, so the idea of not eating meat or not having violence towards animals was very much a part of my childhood. But when I was about 7 years old, I had many friends. I was in the US, so many white American friends, many Indian friends who were eating meat. And there was all this thing about, you have to eat meat, it gives you muscles, it'll give you strength, power. So I became quite curious about it. And it was very interesting that I told my father and mother that, what's all this hype around the meat? And he, rather than kind of suppressing that and telling me, no, stay away from it, we don't do that as Jains, he said, do you want to try it? And I was like, sure. And he took me for a hamburger, which I was quite surprised because he's quite conservative in many ways. But he took me for a hamburger. He said, you taste it yourself. You think what it is. And so I think that was for me a real awakening of what nonviolence is that this idea of, rather than imposing a certain value system or imposing one way of truth, encouraging people to explore the truth for themselves. The other one was, around this idea of forgiveness. So there's an elaborate Jain tradition around every year around forgiveness. The other memory that I have very strongly is that we have in the Jain tradition very strong emphasis on forgiveness. And most of the people I saw growing up were quite, it was almost a kind of superficial or mechanical exercise that they would just go and just say, oh, please forgive me. And particularly to Jains only, amongst Jains. But I had one relative who was quite thoughtful about the whole thing and encouraged me to every year take time and actually reflect. Who have I been aggressive with? Who have I been violent with? Who have I feel out of harmony with? And actually approach those people, whether they were Jains or not Jains, it doesn't matter. But actually really to try to heal those relationships. And I realized that was what I started thinking that, I used to think, nonviolence. There was a period where, this is for cowards and weak people. But actually to go and ask somebody for forgiveness, I felt requires a lot of inner strength, a lot of inner courage. So that's been and still is a big part of my practice also, that to reflect on that every year and try to make that effort and push myself to take those risks. It's a matter of, making yourself vulnerable and reopening something that a wound is there and seeing, okay, how do we heal it? So I think those two memories are very powerful for me.
You're the founder of Shikshantar and of Swaraj University. Can you describe how these experiences were formative and perhaps played a role in your setting up these institutions? Also, do tell us something about the institutions.
So both of these projects, Shikshantar, Swaraj University, more recently something called the Creativity Adda for government school children.
This is all in Udaipur?
No, this is in, the Adda is in Delhi and in Dungarpur, tribal area, and also in Basti, in government schools. So idea was that one very, I think these experiences or these questions around nonviolence and Ahimsa were very prominent for me growing up. And a few things that happened to me, I felt. One is I started looking at some things like competition, very strong competition. I actually made the mistake of winning a few competitions in my schooling time. And I felt that, what have I won? I looked around, all my friends were upset, and I felt very disconnected from them. So I said, there's something fundamentally wrong with this. Why do we have these models where people are winning and other people are losing. Why can't we think of something where everybody moves together? And so many things I used to organize personally with my friends, we were all, supporting each other. There's a very famous favorite saying of mine called, "We have not come to this earth to compete against each other. We've come to complete each other." So this kind of thinking was part of it. So I saw this whole model of education is set up around competition. Then I also saw this idea of, why is there, when you're giving exams, there's only one answer, and there's kind of black and white truth to the examination system. And I said, shouldn't we be exploring any issue? There's so many different dimensions of it, so many ways of seeing it. Why aren't we encouraged to look at those different perspectives? Why just what the textbook says, this becomes the Bible or the gospel or the absolute truth, and we're not allowed to question it? We're not allowed. So I thought that this kind of system is also making people very flat in their orientation and how they see the world and how they're able to engage with diversity. It gets very reduced. So some of these questions were there when we started Shikshantar, to start to reimagine the education system. And also this idea of like compulsion. So I said that, why are we, mainly in this education system, carrot and stick, reward and punishment is the way to motivate people. It's not from their own inner joy, their inner curiosity, their inner creativity. There's no space for that, really. And we're again, this idea of compulsion is a kind of violence that is daily inflicted on children, forcing them to do things without giving them any space to breathe, to think about what they really want to do, who they really are, what's their deeper purpose. So these were some of the things that gave birth to Shikshantar, and then later to Swaraj, and now Creativity at Death.
So how do you, through these institutions, what are some of the ways in which you have explored Ahimsa through these institutions? I mean, by what means do you do that?
We do many experiments around Ahimsa. Actually, I think my own reason, one of the reasons which came to me afterwards, but I think I was searching as a Jain. Actually, I found a huge amount of hypocrisy between what we were talking about and what was actually being practiced. And I felt that we needed to actually have more practice grounds for actually exploring it, and not within the framework of Jainism, but within the concept of Ahimsa. And how do we explore this and experiment with this? So both Shikshantar and Swaraj have been very active spaces to explore what is violence. So one of the forms that we started looking at was violence in this idea of waste. So this whole idea of waste, that actually there's no other species on the planet which creates waste. And we think we are so intelligent as human beings, and why don't we think about how can we produce lifestyles which actually are in harmony with our natural systems? But instead we keep producing waste, and that waste is destroying. I say the waste is actually the worst terrorist. It destroys our water systems, it destroys our air, it destroys our soil. So this is a violence that we're inflicting every day. So we started experimenting with something called zero waste lifestyles. So how do we explore that in a way that we link to Ahimsa? Another idea that we explored very deeply, so this whole idea of copyright and ownership is one that we felt, this idea that, we have this false, I think, belief that we are owners of anything. So Gandhiji and many have talked about trusteeship rather than ownership. And I started looking into those ideas. And so one of the things was copyright. What does it mean to copyright? When we actually had published our first book in Shikshantar, we were thinking this is a dialogue with so many people. How can we say we're the owners of this? This has come out as a shared kind of process. So we started using the word copyleft and said that, no, by sharing knowledge, we actually grow knowledge, not by hoarding it or thinking we're the sole owners of it. So we started exploring it in that way. So many different kinds of, which are not usually in the realm of what people think about violence, but we started, exploring them in all of these domains of where violence actually creeps up. And then, also I think the idea where our philosophy on education is what we call self-design learning. So each person, and it's self, I think, is important to understand. There, self is not this narrow individualistic self. Self is that there's a kind of violence that has been inflicted on us that we, I look at my own family. I'll give you an example. If you asked people of my daughter's generation, generally, who is our family? They'll say, hum do or hamare bache, do bache or do parents. But so two children and two adults. This is their idea of family. But if you ask my father or my grandfather, it's at least 100 people. So what we are trying to do is this expansion of self is very, very important in this idea. So when we say self-designed learning, it's not just as an individual person, but how does our learning take into account both our unique individual self, but also our larger collective self? And how can a learning model, learning processes be developed where we actually nurture both of those things at the same time? Yeah. And so each person asking, very simple, what are you curious about? What are you interested in? I was talking to one friend recently. So he said, we are very open in our school. We have a box, children can ask questions in it. So I said, that's a great idea, but let me ask you, what kind of questions are they asking? My guess would be questions that are related only to the syllabus. He said, yeah, how do you know? I said, yeah, but those aren't their real questions. Their questions would be, if you really ask them, they'd be, why are my parents fighting every day? Or why is my water polluted? Or why is my neighbor throwing waste on our plot every day? Or, all of these things are actually their daily life. So you see how school puts us in a bubble where we actually forget our real questions. But we think that those questions of our everyday lives are the ones that actually we need to work on the most. And you can take any of those questions and you can start to actually open up, whole explorations into much more transdisciplinary study would happen. Because if you look at water, it's connected to every different area. So that's what we've been trying to promote, is to actually start with our own real questions and also have time for ourselves. That I think is very important, to slow down and have time. So, we talk about, for example, in Swaraj a lot, that the need for unplugging.
This is Swaraj University. The need to unplug yourself for bits of time, to actually replug into your deeper self. So this is, I think there's so many dimensions of this that's happening. Before we started, you mentioned that life around us seems to be becoming more violent. Do you feel that one reason for that is because there is so much of this unprocessed and unresolved tension that is there in our lives? Is that one reason?
The operating system is treating us like machines. And so we're expected to speed up faster and faster and faster.
Can you say a bit more? What is the operating system that you're referring to?
So the economic system, the education system, the political system, they assume that we can work 24/7. And the push is towards that. How do you keep maximizing? Every single second of your day should be occupied with something. And so there's a push for going faster and faster and faster and squeezing in more and more and more. And then that's, pushed more by things like FOMO, fear of missing out. So people are always trying to accumulate and grab. And so I think that creates a lot of self-inflicted stress and tension on us, that we are not able to actually slow down. If we can slow down, I think there's more time to process, to heal things, to take time for relationships, to take time for actually, dealing with your own anger, so many things. But we're pushed and pushed. The biggest example is, road rage. People are under such tremendous time pressure there to do what or to go where, I don't know. Yeah. But it's it's a model which is continuously creating this stress and anxiety. Yeah. I think one of the most stupid inventions of modern life is the nuclear family. Actually, this idea of, I think it's really, and you can see it in the West much more clearly, and it's happening now. This sense of, being alone. So I think you can see this really strong sense of being alone and not being part of a community, not being connected to even your own local area, your own ecosystem. This sense of disconnect is so strong these days. There are experiments all over the world now where people are trying to rebuild their sense of extended family. And it doesn't have to be a biological thing. It can be with people who share similar values, who want to share. I visited one project once in Australia. A friend, there's 18 families who chose to live together. And they share, a common urban farm. They share their washing facilities. They share their car even. They share, they share so many, the kitchen. So this kind of model is again something which is coming back, I think.
What are some of the ways in which you see Ahimsa being relevant at a time when there seems to be more violence?
Yeah.
So I want to ask this question at two levels. So how do we address one, violence in everyday life, that you've actually said quite a bit about, and also Ahimsa as resistance, as political resistance.
Yeah.
So if you could share your thoughts on Ahimsa as political resistance.
Yeah. So one of the things I think that my thinking has grown since my childhood experiences has been to actually think of violence, understanding violence, not only at an individual level, but as a systemic level. That many of our modern systems that we've created are in a way designed to not only promote violence but also profit from violence. I remember when I was studying economics in college, the professor actually told us, if your economy is going down, the best way to, and he demonstrated this in the US, the best way to boost your economy is to start a war. So the whole link of how the economic system is tied to the war machine and the military establishment is actually something we don't really reflect upon. Or as I said, the education system, how is it tied to kind of a monocultural approach or to a hierarchy that gets created by the education? These are all ways that the system is actually promoting violence. And I think the deeper thinking of that is this violence that is always perpetuated, that the modern systems are built on the idea that nature is wild or is our enemy, or that it's our role to dominate and control nature. So much of what we see in our systems today is built on this kind of basic assumption. Rather than that we are part of nature, we need to live in harmony with nature. We need to find ways to, live more into the cycles of how nature actually works. There is thinking around that happening, but it's still quite small in comparison to what the dominant systems say. So I think that once we understand that these systems are violent, there's two things that we need to do. One is to see how do we resist that and shift that. Even, and the other side is to actually think about how do we regenerate other systems. How do we think of other systems like we've been doing with education, which actually promote more harmony, more connectedness, more love, more compassion, more empathy, more creativity. These are the kinds of, and this is possible. It's not that it's not possible. It's very much possible, and one can see beautiful results we've seen from that. So, but I think in terms of a political resistance, I have been very much inspired, obviously, by Gandhiji's efforts to take actually nonviolence from even the Jain community, which was still at an individual level, and to start to say that this is a way to approach very deep conflicts. And the two things that at least I've learned from that is that one is that our capacity, and I've tried to build this in myself also, the capacity for dialogue with the other. If one wants to choose nonviolence, we need to be able to see have empathy for the other, and have a deep capacity to engage in dialogue. Otherwise, it will be again at a just walking down the street and saying we're protesting nonviolently is not enough of a strategy.
Yeah.
So, in terms of it, as a philosophy or as a strategy, this idea to cultivate deep dialogue is very, very important. If we really want to do nonviolent, we need to really look at satyagraha more deeply. And where are the ways to, because many people say, I'm not doing anything, so I'm nonviolent. But actually going and specifically looking at where the injustice lies, and where particularly unjust systems, unjust laws, and actually doing something to challenge them. In a very, again, in a loving way, in a compassionate way, in a deep way, and even be willing to break the law. That has to be part of the strategy. Otherwise, there's really the violent systems really don't even care. They've worked out such sophisticated ways now to silence, marginalize.
The dialogue that you're recommending, can you elaborate a little bit on what are some of the ways in which those who are committed to this, those who want to explore a dialogue as an essential part of dialogue with the other, as an essential part of ahimsa, what are some of the things that we have to do in order for that to be possible even? I mean, what is the inner work that is required?
That I was trained in kind of academic tradition of debate, and that means you have to at all costs win the argument. And so I think, and if you go deeper to that, it's your ego, basically. It's not a genuine search for truth or the complexity of truth, the diversity of truth, but it's actually about me being right. So I think the inner work first is to start to let go of that ego and commit oneself to actually seeing the truth in a much wider way. Kind of deeper listening. And seeing how that is. And and third is, I think I have it really for a long time. I was I had been in the corporate world and the mainstream, and after that I developed a real kind of aversion or disgust for the whole system, and for many years I just didn't want to engage with people in that. And I think what shifted for me was that seeing that, okay, maybe finding ways to engage, but not on the terms of that. And that the individuals, because I have, it's crazy. One of my dearest friends, and he's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. He's managing director at Goldman Sachs. So I could not understand. And we didn't talk for 15 years because I just could not accept that. But then to try to see, there's many beautiful things in him also, and to start to open that dialogue and to create a sense of space for vulnerability, for things, and so many things he started sharing. When I took him out of this kind of defensiveness and into a kind of space of listening, he actually opened up, and we found that we agreed on many, many different things. And then there's a point to actually build something again. So I think that shift is to understand systems and to ideologies and all of that, but then in there's a human being, which is not a flat, one-dimensional being. The human being is very complex. In Shikshantar, one of the things that's most interesting is that we have people coming in from the entire ideological spectrum. So I haven't seen students, people in the community in Udaipur, people from all over the country, all over the world. So you can find all different ideologies coming. And what I think connects them is that within their scope of their ideology or the identity that the dominant identity, there's a space of a seeker. They're looking for something different. They understand that what they have is not perfect and is not the ultimate. So there's a space then, and it's up to us then to, initially again, we were like, no, this person is from that background or this background. And I would say there's a lot of tension and fear also. Like, what if this person and this person starts to, they get into a big fight. How are we going to handle that? And that happened a few times. It was kind of ugly, but then we've also developed our capacity to hold that dialogue. And that capacity, I think, comes from a sense of building a trust with each different person individually. That we're there, we can listen to them, we're not going to judge them. And that invites them to be more vulnerable, more open, more willing to even explore other ways. So I think that we've and I think for going forward, that's the only way. If we want to go on a non-violent path, we have to build this platform to have different conversations.
And within Shikshantar, these very different kinds of people from different ideological frames, among themselves, have you seen them find a different way of engaging with each other?
Yeah. That's what's interesting. Initially, I think what I've seen is that actually there are, across all the extreme right, the extreme left, they are basically triggers. So if this person says this, I get triggered. And if people can move beyond the trigger, there's another space which is there. And the way we help people do that is to get into some creative process, like farming together or cooking together. And so before, I think, this is again what the head and the heart spaces are the ones that we need to cultivate more. And from there, it doesn't mean we ignore the head, but we start from a very different vantage point to engage in those conversations, where then there can be a listening, there can be a kind of a relationship. Once that feeling is there. And so I think we've done that, and it's beautiful how people then open. I've seen them even shift their positions, or I've seen them even go and defend in front of the other, somebody who's attacking the other. They'll sit and defend and say, no, you listen, let's engage. So I think there is a possibility, in
so how can some of this experience that you've gained at the grassroots, how can it be applied to the larger situation that we are now seeing unfold in India, where there is a very sharp conflict? Take, for example, on pro or anti-CAA. And people are in the midst of the turmoil.
Yeah.
Where they don't have an anchor of an institution of this kind. Can you think of ways in which these large amorphous, actually they are very loose collectives. I'm not even sure if the word collective applies.
Yeah.
Can you say how even in those large, unorganized, decentralized and completely spontaneous kind of, in a sense, crowds, what are some of the things that people could apply? Because many people are seeking in the crowd. They are seeking.
Yeah. Two things are coming to mind right now. So one is, I think there's still a lot of collective trauma and open wounds that people, again, across ideological things, are carrying right now.
You're saying across the entire ideological spectrum?
Everybody has a wound. Everybody is, and trauma is actually at a subcontinent level.
Say more.
It's not just in India. It's with all of our neighbors, because our neighbors were not our neighbors before. They were all part of us, right? So this trauma is kind of, I would say it's even in our, DNA almost. We're all holders of that, because it's a kind of civilizational trauma. And it's happened in many different spaces, but I think obviously the most strongest was with partition. People are still, and we've never had any space really to talk about that, to hold that, to really heal that and say, because I don't think before partition was happening and people were talking about it, I didn't think people thought that it was going to be so violent, so extreme, and so closing of all the doors, Like, I read accounts where people are saying, oh, we'll have the borders open and we'll be able to share currency and we'll share military and things. And so it became so abrupt and so closed that people don't know how to deal with it. But so I think this space for actually acknowledging this trauma. Even post, in Punjab, in the Northeast, and with Dalits, there's so much trauma.
Kashmir.
In Kashmir. There's so much trauma that is still existing and being played out, reproduced in various ways. So I think if we can actually start talking about it at that level, that would actually, and creating spaces, first even amongst, your own category of friends, can we talk about it? Can we start to at least, we express it, we articulate it, and then you can slowly start widening the circle. So I think that's one way that we need, like I was thinking, we have, I saw with, for example, once in Washington, this Holocaust Museum. So there's a way to actually, they've created, I think it can go even further than that, but even to talk about the things that have happened, we don't have those spaces, and we're assuming that, now TK, that generation of partition is almost dead now, but we're all carrying that.
Yeah.
And even before all the things that happened. And so some way to actually start creating some space to heal that, to grieve that.
But Manish, isn't one of the barriers to this that even to attempt this, get stuck in aversion and blame syndrome? Very similar actually to what you shared about your friend, how you felt towards a friend in Goldman Sachs. And that aversion that A may have towards B's idea on anything becomes such a barrier that
I think that
there's no scope for healing the trauma mutually.
I don't think it's such a barrier. I think it's there, the aversion is, but as I was saying, these triggers, like I was just that the week the whole CAA was in its peak, I was just noticing, like on Facebook, people write one word and somebody would unfriend them. And so these if you look at it, and it's probably like 3 or 4 phrases. And how people who actually were not only Facebook friends but real friends, they're unfriending each other. They're not saying, okay, I'm not going to talk to you. But these are, just to trigger. I think that's where we need to kind of. There's an idea of self-restraint a little bit, a pausing of ourselves rather than getting triggered. That need is there. And there's so many, because if you see, like the major food, water, climate, safety, these are issues that everybody cares about. And so there's a platform, and I think what I was saying in addition to this collective grieving and understanding is this idea that we need to build up that the challenges that we are facing on a planetary level, on an India level, on a subcontinent level, are so great that nobody alone can solve them.
That's true.
And so that is, for me at least, as an impetus. Why did I start to move out of my safe zone to start engaging? Like, we didn't, as I said, for so many years, I didn't want to even talk to corporates. Right? But why did I? Because unless we engage with this, there's no way out of this khadda, this ditch we've fallen into. There's no way to get out. I don't see.
The example that you gave of people defriending each other, you see that clearly as a form of violence. That when we are so quick to give up on people, and is one of the reasons that happens. Is that we never really heard out the person fully. That we took one part or one half or one quarter of what they were saying and made a judgment about the whole person on that basis. Is that one of the issues?
That's one of the issues. I think one of the things is we have to be very careful of, which I see growing, is that the flattening of our identities. It's like we've imported the Western identity politics model, and this latching onto one part, and where we again are very diverse, rich, contradictory human beings, and this lack of listening. I can say, when I posted on my Facebook something which was, anti-CAA, and I got several people personally writing to me. Most of them, I mean, I don't say I knew very well, but a few of them I knew very well. And they're saying, how can you do this? And we're really angry with you. How could you be anti-CAA? And at that point, I felt, this reaction like, screw you, I'll post whatever I want. But then I took a breath and I started an engagement. I didn't get triggered. And I started engagement. I said, okay, what do you feel? What's upsetting you? And I started to, and I remember one specific one, like at least 20 minutes, we were just chatting. And a few times in the chat, I said, I just want you to know, I also respect your position. I love you. I care for you. And then we resumed the chat. And by the end, there was a very deep shift in position. At least a willingness to listen, which was not there. I don't think necessarily they changed their whole position, but a willingness to listen, a willingness to also see that there are so many other dimensions that are not being spoken about in the way the debate has even been shifted, framed and shifted. There are many things which are not being spoken about, which need to be connected into this to understand the bigger picture. So I felt there was a willingness to actually look at that and see that we can redefine the terms of the debate. I think this is the other thing, is that so often we are, the way the mainstream media wants to promote controversy, conflict, and the way they frame things are ways that actually feed into that very well, but don't give us space for actually listening and building containers of care and empathy and compassion. So I think we need to deepen our own skills in that, and I think then there's a great possibility that can emerge from that.
So before we close, a question that has been asked many times, that it's a commonly held misbelief that Ahimsa is for saints. You have clearly shown us many different ways in which very ordinary people who have no claims to sainthood or aspirations to sainthood are living it out.
Yeah.
But before we close, would you like to give some key points or key insights or key suggestions how ordinary people who want to explore or who are wanting to at least give Ahimsa a chance, how they might work with it?
Yeah.
That's
a great question.
It's a summary. In a sense, I'm asking you to summarize.
So
You've said it in parts.
There's a few things. So one is, on a very practical day-to-day level, I think one is, if we look at reducing our own consumption. So it's not in a saintly ascetic way, but actually I am inspired by, in Jain tradition, we actually talk about less is more. That you can actually have more joy, more pleasure by having less. So I think it's a flip for, having less, you have to be a sadhu to do that. No, but we can actually experience life much more. So if we start to reduce, and I see this happening all over the world again, voluntary simplicity movements are taking place, minimalistic living, people who are, really reducing the amount of things they buy. See really what are the things that we need, what are the things that we really value. Giving attention to that, I think, will, on an individual level, help us. The second thing, I think, is cultivating a deeper spirit of gratitude. And a sense of gratitude helps to nurture a sense of sufficiency, a sense of abundance within us. And I think those small acts of sharing help to reweave the social fabric. This idea of we do a lot of experiments in Shikshantar around trust. How do we build this? And luckily, and at least in Udaipur, there's still very much of an openness for, people know each other quite a bit. It's a smaller city. But in bigger cities, how we can do more acts of kindness, more connection. So to build this fabric of trust.
More gift economy,
gift culture kinds of things. This trust will actually help us feel more at ease with ourselves, more sense of security, more sense of connectedness, more sense of being seen and respected. Which everyone wants actually, but we in this modern economy and modern setup, we don't get that oftentimes. So I think that's the second thing. The third thing is what happens is, growing up with this narrative, don't trust your neighbor, don't touch strangers. But we like to talk about, there's a favorite saying I have is the only strangers are the people whose stories I haven't heard. So how do we, there's all kinds of experiments that we have been doing to, for example, on the lakefront in Udaipur, Fateh Sagar, we organize, for example, something called the Game-a-thon. So we go and try to shift also out of all of our forms of play are violent in a sense. They're competitive, violent. So how do we create collaborative forms of play? So we have so many games that we go and play with and invite strangers, start playing together, start listening to their stories, what they're excited about, what they're passionate about, and give us space for that. The third thing I would say is this idea of actually, where do we spend our money? Where do we invest our money? That this is very simple. Whatever little or lot of money that we may have, where are we putting it into organizations, causes, businesses even, which are nonviolent? So for example, we have, my family, we've created a little fund in Udaipur to support businesses which are, and invest in them, which are young people who want to create things which are nonviolent. So we have, for example, several things. We're supporting an organic store, working with local farmers. We're supporting a friend who is using marble slurry waste and has created bricks out of that. And we're trying to stay away from, the share market and from companies which are doing extraction from the environment, which are doing military, promoting in the arms deal companies and things like. So we can be more conscious about where our investment goes and our resources go to support the kinds of nonviolent and a nonviolent economy, if we will, or a localized economy, which also helps to build more safety and security locally. So in the education system, we're trying to really push more spaces for creativity, for exploration, for using all this energy. I've seen it, like we're working in one government school in Delhi with this creativity adda. So many of the teachers have come and said, what did you do to these kids? I said, what do you mean? I said, some of these kids were like so shaitani, so aggressive, so violent. How did they shift in 2-3 months? Their energy has totally changed. And it's because they get space to be creative, to express themselves, to explore things, to build their own confidence. And a lot of violence is because people don't feel confidence in themselves. And then they need to dominate somebody else to feel good about themselves. So just this shift of having space for kids to do things that they're creative, whether it's music or cooking or dance or building things, whatever those spaces are, it's very, very important that we start to reclaim those, because much of what I feel we created this, we talked about something called, we are being fed the ready-made life. Everything is packaged and sold to us rather than our own capacity to create, produce. And you can buy everything on Amazon now, right? You don't have to think about or you go to Swiggy, I don't have to cook, So this reclaiming our aspects of our life, where our own creativity. I tell you, like young boys, I'm like, go into the kitchen, and really great men can be really great chefs, and you don't have to be ashamed, we can't go in the kitchen, this is women's work. But coming into the kitchen is a great way to express your creativity and also to build a kind of community around it. So many things like that, I think. So these would be at least 4 things that immediately come to mind, where you can start practicing Ahimsa in your everyday life.
Thank you so much, Manish. God bless.
Thank you.
Yeah.